All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're unpacking a profoundly moving, entirely fictional human interest story about the quiet power of simply noticing the invisible people around us. We'll be exploring some heavy but relatable themes: loneliness, the weight of regret, and the absolutely incredible impact of real human connection. Now, fair warning, you're not going to find any exaggerated Hollywood melodrama here. What we have is a deeply human, realistic story set in a believable small American town. So, let's dive in.
Okay, 20. Just let that number sink in for a second. For 2 entire decades, a 67-year-old man named Robert lived a completely isolated, entirely overlooked life in his community. Now, he was a total recluse. Actually, scratch that, he wasn't a shut-in by any means. He had a modest job, he'd go out and shop for his inexpensive groceries, and he walked the exact same quiet streets as everybody else. He just looked like an ordinary working-class guy with a weathered face and simple clothes. But to practically everyone around him, he was essentially a ghost.
People literally saw him every single day. They absolutely knew his face, but nobody, and I mean nobody, knew his story. They knew his routine, right? Like what time he bought his groceries and they'd watch him eat all by himself at the local diner. Most folks just kind of figured Robert was an ordinary older guy living a quiet, solitary life. They got so incredibly used to his silent presence that almost everyone just walked right past him, day after day, year after year. He was hiding right there in plain sight.
But you know how these things go. That all changed on one specific afternoon. A young man, probably in his mid to late 20s, named Ethan, noticed Robert sitting all alone outside that same local diner. And look, Ethan isn't portrayed as some flawless, caped superhero. He's just a guy who is actually paying attention. Instead of doing what the rest of the town had done for 20 years and just walking past, Ethan decided to stop. He sat down nearby and asked him a ridiculously simple question. "Are you okay?" And that one tiny 3-word question, it became the spark for a totally unexpected, slow-building friendship. Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast between Robert's life before and after this conversation. Because, let's be real, this wasn't some instant movie magic fix where suddenly everything is perfect. At first, Robert was super guarded, giving these really short answers and completely dodging anything about his past. But there's this subtle, beautiful progression. Ethan just kept talking to him naturally, right? He never treated Robert like a charity case. And because of that, Robert slowly began to transform. You start seeing him visit the diner regularly, he's actually helping out at local businesses, and get this, he even starts smiling again. It is such a believable, gradual shift.
So, as Robert gradually opened up and let Ethan into his daily life, Ethan stumbled onto a pretty massive secret that Robert had been fiercely guarding. Beneath the surface of his simple routine, Robert had secretly been squirreling away money. But much more importantly than that, he had been writing and hiding this whole collection of unmailed letters. Which naturally brings us to the emotional core of our explainer. It raises this heartbreaking question. Who in the world was this quiet man so desperately trying to reach? Why hold on to dozens and dozens of letters if you literally never intend to drop them in a mailbox? Ethan, and honestly us along with him, starts to realize that Robert's intense isolation wasn't just him being an introvert. It was a completely self-imposed exile.
And this brings us to Robert's heartbreaking backstory. 20 years ago, the guy had a completely different life. We're talking a successful career, big dreams for the future, and most importantly, a family. But a devastating personal mistake mixed with some really difficult circumstances ended up costing him almost everything. He became totally estranged from the people he loved most in the world. Now, he took responsibility for it, sure, but the real tragedy, he never ever learned how to forgive himself. So here is the absolute crucial takeaway. Robert's crippling loneliness wasn't happening because the town rejected him. It was happening because the massive weight of his own regret convinced him that he didn't deserve a second chance. He wasn't sitting there blaming the world for his problems. No, the reason he stayed locked in that quiet, isolated life wasn't a lack of people who could care about him. It was his own deep-seated belief that he had entirely forfeited his right to be cared for. Regret had quite literally become a trap. Through Ethan's gentle, persistent friendship, the truth finally comes out. Those dozens of hidden, unsent letters, they were all addressed to his estranged daughter. She's now an independent woman in her early 40s. For 2 whole decades, Robert had been pouring his absolute soul out onto paper, but his fear just kept him paralyzed. He was terrified, like completely convinced that she had moved on and wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. So he just kept the letters hidden, choosing the pain of silent regret over the terrifying risk of being rejected all over again.
Well, once Ethan figures this out, he steps up. And I love this. He doesn't give some generic, cheesy, motivational speech.
He just looks at Robert and challenges him to stop letting a mistake from 2 decades ago dictate the entire rest of his life. He literally just tells him, stop living inside your regret. Ethan basically pushes Robert to take a massive, terrifying leap of faith. And then, with this sudden burst of quiet courage, Robert actually does it. He takes one of the letters and drops it into the mail. And then, we just wait. We don't get an immediate answer. Robert is left sitting in absolute agony, spinning his wheels, wondering if she's even going to open the envelope, let alone read it or actually reply. It's this incredibly tense, beautifully human moment of raw vulnerability.
After days of agonizing waiting, she replies, and her response is just so grounded. She writes, I have wondered about you for years too. Notice what she doesn't do. She doesn't magically forgive him for 20 years of absence in an instant. Her emotions are totally conflicted, exactly as any real person's would be. But this one simple sentence proves she hadn't erased him from her mind. The door isn't kicked wide open, but, it is unlocked. And they agree to finally meet.
So what happens when they finally get in the same room? It is brilliantly grounded. If this were a standard Hollywood blockbuster, we'd have instant forgiveness, a swelling orchestra in the background, and this picture-perfect, tearful reconciliation. But this is real life. The reunion is quiet, it's kind of awkward, it's immensely complicated, there's real silence and hesitation in the room, and honestly, that is so powerful because it allows forgiveness to happen the way it actually does in the real world, slowly and gradually.
Pulling back for a second, this explainer leaves us with some really profound themes. We've seen the suffocating trap of silent regret, and on the flip side, the unbelievable power of just one simple conversation. It reminds us that forgiveness is absolutely a process. Most importantly, it shows us that the people we casually ignore on the street every single day, they are often carrying deep, incredibly complex stories that we couldn't even begin to imagine.
Because here is the biggest reality check and the most important lesson Robert learns. Getting a second chance doesn't magically hit the undo button on the mistakes he made 20 years ago. The past is for sure still the past. The pain he caused, the 20 years they lost, none of that can be rewritten. A second chance is not an eraser.
What it actually is an opportunity. It gives him the courage to face those past mistakes head on and intentionally choose human connection for whatever time he has left. A second chance means deciding what to do with the days in front of you. It's Robert finally realizing that his life isn't over. Despite his serious imperfections and his heavy history, he can still choose to step out of the shadows, be a genuine friend to Ethan, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuild that bridge with his daughter. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Think about the people in your own town, at your local diner or the grocery store. The people whose faces you totally recognize, but whose stories you have no clue about. Kindness isn't always some grand, sweeping gesture. Sometimes it's literally just the willingness to stop and actually see someone. If you saw someone sitting alone today, would you walk right past them? Or would you ask, are you okay? Just think about it. Thanks for joining me for this explainer today, and honestly, I hope it changes the way you look at the world around you.